This week on Talk by Turner, we're diving into health, specifically what it means to live with a chronic condition like epilepsy. Some questions we'll be asking: what does it mean to live with epilepsy? And what are some common misconceptions about the condition? How can raising awareness and growing the condition's visibility help the people living with it? How will federal funding cuts impact research and treatment? Let's get into it. I'm your host, Jeffrey Colon, and you're listening to Talk by Turner. Talk by Turner dives deep into intellectual discovery while examining what's happening in our world right here, right now. Join us each week to hear from industry experts and published authors as they share their knowledge and insight on today's most important topics. Now, let's see who's on this week's episode. This week, we're joined by Mary V. Slinkard, lawyer, author, and an avid supporter of the epilepsy community. After a successful 2-decade career as a commercial litigator, Mary decided to blend her legal expertise with literary finesse as a suspense author. Her debut novel, Her Final Gamble, was released earlier this week. Alongside her writing, she's also a passionate advocate for epilepsy awareness and research, with a portion of her book's proceeds being donated to organizations supporting epilepsy research and patient care. Mary, welcome to Talk.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. So to kick things off, could you explain what epilepsy is exactly and what it looks like to live with this condition?
Sure. Epilepsy is a neurological condition where the brain's electrical activity is abnormal, and that's what causes seizures. And the most classic seizure is that full body convulsion that most people know about, and that's what's called a generalized seizure, because there's two types of seizures. There's focal seizures and generalized seizures. And actually what happens there is different parts of the brain. A focal seizure is one part of the brain, whereas a generalized seizure is both sides of the brain. I often tell people that having a seizure is much like the brain is much like a computer. And what happens when you have a seizure, just like when your computer sort of goes out on the fritz, that's what happens in your brains. Your neurons misfire. And in my case, I get what's called an aura. And it's a little light that happens in my eye, and that's what allows me to drive. But so what happens is that light starts spinning, and that gives me enough time to pull over, but it also tells me that my brain is literally shutting down. And then I actually convulse, and just like a computer, it literally just goes, that's it. And then what happens is when I wake from a seizure, it takes me a long time it takes a while for my brain to reboot, and I temporarily don't remember what happens. So then I sleep a little bit, but then my brain gets right back to where it was.
So, could you share a little more about other experiences with the condition and how it's impacted your overall life?
Well, what I learned, so I was 31 when I had my very first seizure. I was working downtown in downtown in Philadelphia. I was on Market Street, middle of a big case. I ran out to get a sandwich, and the next thing I know, I'm in a hospital with 20 staples in my head. So that obviously was very traumatic, because given my age and the fact that it was my first seizure, there was a very good chance that it was a brain tumor. But unfortunately, because the staples, they couldn't find out for 2 weeks. So I lived with that. And thank God for me, it wasn't a brain tumor. But to this day, they still don't know why I have epilepsy or why I have the seizures. And what I've learned is that epilepsy, for a lot of people, it causes anxiety and depression because the problem is you don't know when you're going to have a seizure. So I have four little kids, and I remember one time I was on a ski lift with my two sons, and there's a part of you that's like, oh my gosh, I can't seize right now because it would be really traumatic, not only for them, but it's unsafe. So it's that anxiety of never knowing when it's going to happen that is makes it difficult or challenging to live with.
Do you think that there are stereotypes about people with epilepsy? And how does greater awareness and education about the condition help to combat some of those misconceptions?
Definitely from what, so when I was diagnosed with epilepsy, I ended up doing a lot of work with the awareness because for me, I was fortunate. I was 31 years old. I was happily married. But for a lot of people, they are diagnosed at a very young age. And so that's when they live with this anxiety and depression. And they believe that there's a stigma attached to it, that people don't want people to know that they have epilepsy. But the reality is, one out of 26 people have had a seizure. So if you're in a room of 100 people, that means four people have had it. And I think by just making people aware that you can live a very normal life and that, thank God, today with medicine and with a lot of the new treatments that are out there, for a lot of people, it's very controllable. And so I think it takes away from that scared, what do I do if someone's having a seizure? And it just educates people so that they're not afraid what to do if they see someone having a seizure.
Speaking of someone having a seizure, what are some practical tips you can share with our listeners, viewers, to help someone who may be having a seizure? What are some tips you could provide?
Sure. I think the biggest one is that you no longer put anything in anyone's mouth. That is not what you do. The key is to get someone in a safe position and you turn them on their side and you just make sure that if they're going to, if they're convulsing, that they're not going to hit their head and that they are safe. So the first thing is for the person that is witnessing it, for them to stay calm, because that's what the person who's having the seizure needs, is for someone to watch them and make sure that they stay safe. The second thing is they do say that after that you're supposed to time the seizure, because for medical people that's very important that they know how long the person has seized. So timing is very important. They do say that you call 911 after like 3 minutes that the person continues to seize. My feeling is if you don't know the person that's seizing, I think it's best to err on the side of just calling 911. Like, for example, my husband knows my epilepsy. So if I'm seizing, he may not call 911 because he knows what to do. He knows that mine are controllable. So he may not know, he may not call, but if someone is witnessing it to a total stranger, I think it's important to err on the side of safety and call 911.
In your debut novel, Her Final Gamble, you actually feature a character with epilepsy. So why was it important for you to include this representation in your novel? And what is the importance of representation in general?
So I love mystery novels. I think they're exciting to read. And I think they're exciting when the character is flawed. People like flawed characters and they like to see people overcome obstacles. So for me, it was a perfect combination because my protagonist, Jacqueline Stone, suffers a devastating loss. But on top of that, she also has epilepsy. So she's going through a lot. And then she's thrown into this deadly game where she has to figure out who the killer is before time runs out. And I think it just makes people root for her and cheer for her. And then they learn that, again, that it's a condition that you can live with and that people can be very successful even though they have that condition. And I thought it was just a perfect combination for me to highlight a cause I really care about. So I'm entertaining people, I think, hopefully, with a wonderful thriller, but then I'm educating them about what to do if you see someone having a seizure. And I just think it's a perfect combination.
Describe some of the work that you do with the Epilepsy Foundation of Eastern Pennsylvania.
Sure. So the foundation offers a lot of wonderful support programs, and their big program is called Camp Achieve, which is really important because there they do an overnight camp for kids that actually are growing up with epilepsy. And it's a great place for kids to meet other kids that have the same condition and also to take a break and just have fun. So we do Camp Achieve, and we obviously do a lot of fundraising and we do a lot of programs. I was just recently at a women's conference on Sunday where we learned about women's health and how different hormones and pregnancies, and we give, education on different issues and factors that are affecting people with epilepsy.
So, moving on to recent headlines about federal funding, especially for science research. Since January, more than $2 billion in research grants have been canceled. Scientists are saying this will have major impacts in across the board for Americans' health. And this also includes research and funding for epilepsy treatments. So, as someone in the world of epilepsy advocacy, what's your reaction to these developments, and what do you think the future of epilepsy research will look like in the coming years?
To be honest, it's not 100% clear what funding, if any, with respect to epilepsy has been cut. But I think it just serves as such an important reminder that we, as citizens, are the powerful voice, that we need to use our voice to contact the local, state, and federal representatives to make sure that important funding is not being cut, because there's so much with technology and medicines with epilepsy that we just have to stay on top of it. And if we learn that we use our voices and our community to make sure that these advancements aren't stalled and that we can keep moving forward with progress, because there's a lot of research on medicines and even treatments that are so key to advancements in epilepsy.
You're a lawyer, correct?
Yes.
So I'm curious, are there certain skills you learned as a lawyer that you use in your daily life? And how does being a lawyer affect your life in other ways?
Well, I used to joke that life is a negotiation and my hardest clients were my children. So I use my law skills every day, arguing with them and negotiating with them to get stuff done. And I do think in life, right, you're constantly negotiating and trying to get your point across and what you want to accomplish. So I do. I think law is one of the best educations, because the other key thing with law is you learn how to write. And I always give the example when people ask me about law school, is that they teach you how to take a story or a set of facts and do it from different perspectives. And the classic case that we did, like the very beginning of law school, was Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And if you take that story from Goldilocks of a little child lost in the woods, curious, comes upon this house and looks in the house and tries different things, and then somebody runs in and starts yelling at her, and she runs out because she's scared. It's so much different than from the three bears perspective of they go out and come home and their house is destroyed and they find a stranger in their house and they've been violated, right? So I think that that skill of taking a set of facts and presenting it so that you can achieve what you want with those set of facts, you use it almost every single day of your life.
What's a part of the job that that's not as flashy as the depictions make it out to be when it comes to lawyering? And what's like one thing that would surprise people if you had to tell them about the job?
Well, so I was a commercial litigator, and obviously, when you see shows on TV about law, the litigators are constantly in court. They're constantly trying cases and arguing, and it looks so fun in front of the juror and all of this. That is probably the biggest misconception because you rarely, as a civil litigator, it's different if you're in criminal cases in the DA's office or something like that. But even then, you spend so much time writing briefs and arguing, on paper that I think that's what surprises people. As a young attorney, especially, I spent 90% of my time writing and researching and preparing arguments on paper that I rarely ever got to court. So I think that's what's fun about writing novels because you can skip all of that and get right to the fun stuff.
So your debut novel, it follows a criminal defense attorney defending a man accused of murder in the face of mounting evidence. So my question, how did your career influence the story?
I think one of the things that I used from my own career in the novel and what Jacqueline does is her intuition about people. She's very perceptive of what people are saying, and more importantly, what they're not saying, so that she can build her case and that she can figure out what the motives are behind different actions that these people have. And that it was something that I embellished more because, again, my cases were more civil and more contractual in terms of what people did and do. In law, you learn to interview people. And when you're what we call deposing, which is basically a formal interview, you actually read between the lines. And you also see how they answer, what they say, and what they don't say. And that tribute. I gave that to Jacqueline and she used it much better than I did. But that's how she tries to figure out the murder itself.
What do you hope listeners take away from today's episode?
I hope they take away the fact that this is a thriller. This is a suspense thriller about a very unique character that is overcoming a lot. Suspense thriller that's about trust and buried secrets and one woman's chance at redemption when everything is on the line. And I think it's unique in the sense that it not only will it entertain people, because I think it's very suspenseful, I think it keeps you guessing until the very end, but will also educate you about a cause that is very dear to me.
Where can listeners find you online?
They can find me. All of my social media is at Mary V. Slinkard. So they can find me on Instagram, on Facebook, and
remind us again the title of your latest book.
It's called Her Final Gamble.
All right. Mary Slinkard, thank you for joining us on Talk by Turner.
Thank you so much for having me.
Talk by Turner, hosted by Jeffrey Colon. Watch and listen now wherever you enjoy podcasts.